It's already been dubbed the Hot Mess Olympics. By all accounts, the next games are in shambles, over budget by billions, on its third round of venues, deeply unpopular with the public, and U-turn after U-turn in planning thanks to several elections and changes in government. But perhaps the wildest part of all this could be that you don't even know what city these games are taking place in. Over the last few decades, we've seen the Olympics in Barcelona, Sydney, Athens, Beijing, London, Rio, Tokyo and Paris. When you say these cities, you can immediately conjure an image in your mind. They are iconic destinations. So it might come as a bit of a surprise that after LA, the Olympics are heading to the Australian city of Brisbane. So where on earth is Brisbane exactly? Well, it's here, north of Sydney and way north of Melbourne in what's affectionately referred to as the Sunshine State of Queensland. Temperatures here hit up to 40 degrees Celsius when it isn't the rainy season. There are crocodiles, koalas, the Irwins, and some 2.5 million people. The state is famous for its colourful political characters.
Let there be 1,000 blossoms bloom as far as I'm concerned. But I ain't spending any time on it.
And its beloved wildlife sanctuaries, as well as roller coasters, skyscrapers on the beach, and its record number of retirees.
Brisbane's grown tremendously in the last few decades, primarily off the back of internal migration. There are a lot of migrants from, for example, Melbourne and Sydney who moved to Brisbane, largely in search of cheaper housing prices and nice warm weather with lots of sunshine. I'm an urban and economic geographer at the University of Queensland. I've lived in Queensland for 13 years.
Now, for our American viewers, Queensland probably most closely resembles Florida. So, how did the Florida of Australia get the world's most famous sporting events? Well, unsurprisingly, it came down to politics. But Brisbane's actually been quietly wanting the Games for a very, very long time. The city originally put in a bid in the early 80s for the 1992 Olympics. They proposed reusing the venues they'd used for the 1982 Commonwealth Games and splitting the Olympics up into zones across the city rather than all in one enormous, expensive stadium complex. Those games eventually went to Barcelona, but Brisbane came very close. The year 2000, the Millennium Bug, Britney Spears, Big Brother, and the Sydney Olympics. The 27th Olympiad was a roaring success, both for Sydney and Australia. New world records were set. The opening ceremony featured Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, marking a turning point in global recognition of Indigenous Australians. And a new bar was set for environmentally friendly Olympics. From a construction perspective, the Olympics completely transformed Sydney. The Sydney Harbour Tunnel was completed, as was the Ultimo Parmont Light Rail System, the Airport City Link, and a railway loop line to connect the Olympic Park with the Sydney Rail network. Additionally, new sports venues were built or renovated, such as the Sydney International Regatta Centre, the Sydney Showground, and the New South Wales Tennis Centre. Major public parks, plazas, and city sidewalks were completely redesigned, repaved, and furnished with modern street lighting and newly planted trees. One of the most successful aspects of the 2000 Games was the transformation of Homebush Bay, a rundown area of the city which was previously used for abattoirs and for depositing liquid waste. It was transformed into the Olympic Park. Between 1999 and 2000, 5,660 new housing units were built here. Nearby brownfield sites were also redeveloped, with new residential hotspots emerging in the surrounding areas. It's currently home to 230 businesses and boasts more than 14 million visitors each year.
A lot of people predicted that Sydney's economic fortunes would really suffer in the period after the 2000 Games, but in fact, the exact opposite happened. Sydney really hit its growth spurt. It became a global city. And in fact, all of the stadium infrastructure that was built for the 2000 Games to this day is very well utilized.
The 2000 Olympics not only won gold as a media event, they also lifted up Sydney in a truly meaningful way. Now, Brisbane wanted a piece of the Games more than ever. 40 years after their original bid, Brisbane bid again, but this time they won. Although by 2021, the system had radically changed. Cities no longer compete against each other in a bidding process where they would often spend tens of millions of dollars on promotion and lobbying. Bids like Brisbane's original 1992 effort included elaborate presentations, international travel, and a kind of campaign-style approach, but it all became pretty controversial, and several cities, including Boston, Rome and Hamburg, all withdrew from the 2024 bidding process after a public backlash. It didn't help that there were allegations of vote buying and corruption, similar to those that followed Rio back in 2017. Since 2020, the IOC has introduced a new reformed bidding process. They now work proactively with cities in a dialogue phase before formal bidding. That means no actual campaigns are carried out and cities are effectively chosen. And those cities are chosen earlier, giving the hosts much more time to get ready. Instead of the usual 7 years, cities now get 11. So when it came to choose the location for the 2032 Games, Brisbane was effectively competing against no one.
The Brisbane Olympic bid was concocted quite a few years ago, and this is certainly not the first time Brisbane has bid. However, during the pandemic, there was an opportunity.
They pitched a remarkably similar Olympics to the one they did in 1992. Events would be staged at more than 30 venues across southeast Queensland, in Brisbane, the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Logan, Ipswich and Redlands, making this more of a Queensland Olympics rather than just a Brisbane one. Brisbane also boasted that 80% of their proposed venues already existed or would be temporary.
I think Brisbane's decision to put an Olympic bid was pretty mixed. The housing crisis that we're experiencing today was not quite as acute then. But it was felt by many. There was also the sense that it would drive infrastructure investment that either was or may not be needed. And of course, there's always the fear that the Olympics will bring about white elephant projects and that money will be allocated to things that aren't necessarily delivering legacy impacts like they should.
The centrepiece of their pitch was the expansion of the Gabba Stadium. The Gabba is something of a Brisbane institution. It's been around since 1895, mainly hosting cricket and Australian rules football. But it only has a seating capacity of 40,000 people, shy of the 50,000 plus that's needed for the Olympics. The initial plan was to demolish the stadium and build a new Gabba capable of holding the 10,000 extra people, as well as a new pedestrian plaza. The cost of that was set to be $1 billion, which later rose to $2.7 billion. The plan itself drew public outrage. But this demolition would also see the destruction of a heritage-listed building, a school, and you'd see the closure of two vital thoroughfares, Vulture Street and Stanley Street, for the entirety of the construction. To make things worse, Melbourne withdrew from hosting the 2026 Commonwealth Games. Their games had ballooned from roughly $2.6 billion to an estimated $6 to $7 billion, and were just simply not worth it anymore. Fear grew that something similar could happen to Brisbane. The original bid was spearheaded by former Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. After her resignation in late 2023, new Premier Stephen Miles reassessed the project and opted for a more cost-effective, spread-out approach. In March 2024, the Queensland government officially scrapped the Gabba rebuild and proposed to redevelop the 80s-era Queensland Sports and Athletics Centre in the suburbs as a boutique athletic stadium. This again faced backlash. It played into fears that alongside Paris and Los Angeles, Brisbane might come across as a second-rate city getting ready to host a second-rate Games, reheating the leftovers as it were, instead of creating a brand new gourmet meal like the Olympics of Beijing or London, for example. The new location was also 10 to 15 kilometres away from the centre of the city.
It's not a very good place for public transport. In fact, it has almost no public transport. So a large sticking point, and one of the main reasons they actually ended up backflipping on the second plan, was that instituting a busway would have been very expensive and there's no rail infrastructure.
Then there was another election. David Crisafulli went to the state election in October repeatedly promising no new stadiums. Instead, he would convene a 100-day review of Olympic venues.
A lot of people were not happy about the Olympics in 2023, 2024, because the cost of living and affordability crunch in Southeast Queensland had actually gotten a lot worse since the initial Olympic bid. So a lot of people were saying, why should we be paying for these expensive games when in fact we have bigger fish to fry? We've got people who are out of work. We've got people who can't afford their first homes. We've got lagging infrastructure that doesn't necessarily relate to athletics and sports stadiums.
The now Premier has presented the third plan for the Brisbane Games, and can you guess what it entails? Well, there are more than 5,000 submissions received from the general public. After promising no new stadiums to a state that was growing increasingly apathetic towards the now very costly Olympics, Crisafulli promised an enormous 63,000-seat Olympic stadium built in Victoria Park.
Well, Queensland Premier David Crisafulli today confirmed the state's worst-kept secret. Brisbane will get a new stadium which will act as the centrepiece for the 2032 Olympic Games.
On top of that will be a 25,000-seat new aquatic complex at Spring Hill, promising to be one of the most state-of-the-art. Olympians may be missing Paris's Dirty Seine after this. Rowing is going to take place in Rockhampton, an area famous for its crocodiles. Despite being given a massive head start, the Brisbane Olympics are now behind schedule, missing the 7-year deadline for when venues and a plan are to be sketched out. The city has had to ask the IOC for an extension and now hopes to provide those plans in 2026.
Australian politics tend to be extremely consultative, to the point where it may impede decision-making.
Public enthusiasm for the Games remains mixed.
A lot of people were saying, why should we be paying for these expensive games when in fact we have bigger fish to fry? We've got people who are out of work. We've got people who can't afford their first homes. We've got lagging infrastructure that doesn't necessarily relate to athletics and sports stadiums.
But we're already seeing the real-world knock-on effect the Olympics typically has for its host cities. Brisbane is underway on some massive infrastructure projects, most notably the $6.3 billion Cross River Rail. It's a new 10.2-kilometre rail line with 5.9 kilometres of twin tunnels that dive under the Brisbane River and the Central Business District, or CBD. Essentially, they're building a massive new railway right below downtown Brisbane. That project got a kick thanks to the Olympic deadline. Brisbane also remains one of Australia's fastest growing cities, and by the time 2032 rolls around, we can expect plenty more changes to come.
I personally think Brisbane is a great place to hold the Olympics. Very few cities are growing at the pace Brisbane's growing. It's a metropolitan region of 3 million, and it's likely to expand to 4 million in the next 15 years. But we don't have a world-class arena. We don't have a stadium that's world-class in size like they do in Melbourne and Sydney and even Perth. And so I think some of it is driven by FOMO. Some of it is driven by Brisbane wanting to be at the level of Melbourne, Sydney, and other Australian and global cities. And some of it is genuine need for infrastructure.
The Olympics have always had their controversies and have faced opposition from locals before. This new age of more streamlined, less expensive games continues to work out the kinks in a very public court. It's likely that by the time the crowds and tourists arrive, people will get on board as they usually do and will become swept up in the event's undeniability.
It's been really interesting to live through the Olympic planning discussions. It really makes you appreciate just how complex they are and that no decision is made lightly.
Since we initially scripted this video, local Indigenous groups have sued the government on the basis that Victoria Park is of great significance and history. There are ancient trees, artefacts, and important ecosystems all existing there. There may even be ancestral remains. We'll have to wait and see what impact this has on the Games, but it's another example of how contentious these Olympics have already been. Time will tell what the 35th Olympiad will make of Australia's third city. As always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.